Location. I never told Suzanne the real reason why I bought us a house whose backyard looked out on a steel smelting plant. Between our backyard fence and the smelting plant was an empty lot, a short expanse of matted grass and scrub brush, with the occasional clump of feeble trees whose hard-knuckled branches beckon at the sun. The backyard faced east, and on mornings when I had the time I would have my coffee while watching the red-orange sunrise creep up from behind the plant and set the bulky geometry of its buildings aglow. Suzanne and I bought the house for cheap, but we could have afforded better. I spent months making the case for the house as the best choice among the list of selections we had mulled over, nudging my wife away from more reasonable options with brief, polite comments, making sure to keep my voice calm and my tone reasonable, and shrugging at the positive aspects of other choices when I could find no string of words with which to diminish them. An above-average preschool near the house was what finally convinced Suzanne that this was the ideal place to raise our child. Before bringing Suzanne to the school for a tour, I spent several hours researching the history and general pedagogical outlook of the school and met with the headmaster while Suzanne was at Lama's class. I later framed this meeting as the extension of an algorithm-driven whim, telling Suzanne I'd seen a banner ad for the school pop up on social media and had gone in first to investigate without her, to save her the trouble. The tour was a by-the-numbers affair. I was careful not to appear too enthusiastic, not to agree with everything the headmaster said, and to ask a probing question now and then, as if lapsing briefly into the latent suspicion that arises in every parental mind at the thought of entrusting a child to an unknown place full of unknown people. It took a few weeks for Suzanne to come around, but once she did, the decision was made. The moment when Suzanne agreed on the issue of the house was the last time I felt a palpable relief at the prospect of moving there. As the months wore on, however, the initial dread that caused me to construct my elaborate design pressed harder on the cage of my skull, like a stubborn weed beneath old asphalt. Progressive maternity legislation enabled me to take the same amount of paid leave from work as Suzanne. Those months were near unbearably tense, not because of any concerns about the pregnancy, which by all metrics was progressing normally, but rather because it was harder to keep tabs on a recent series of breakthroughs my colleagues at the lab were still following up on. The energy efficiency of the most recent dish of Mark III assemblers was nearly 40% greater than the previous batch, and their mobility had been improved. Each post on the internal forums was more excited than the last, and each night I found myself losing more sleep, fixated on the same dimmed screen in the dark. Suzanne gave birth on a Tuesday morning. It was surreal to hold the baby for the first time. I felt a mixture of equal parts awe, love, and terror. Beneath that initial shock of emotion was the same dread that had been sleeping in me for the long hours I had been waiting by Suzanne's side, through dilations and contractions, and samples and blood pressure checks and painkillers. A dread that had slept for a time before stirring awake. The baby cried and screamed, off and on, for the first few weeks, writhing in the throes of nascent sentience. Suzanne and I did our best to keep time with the infant, living for months on the schedule of a drunk. There were times when I held the squirming bundle and felt something like a combination of hubris and shame. I wanted to apologize for my part in this child's existence, for sentencing this being to the ongoing suffering that shapes all human lives, but also enables us to appreciate what is good. I knew that both such an apology and the part of me that the impulse came from, if I allowed either one to surface, would doom this little life to the soul rot of coddling, to a slow descent of character caused by entitlement, impatience, self-pity, and fear. When I returned to work, there was a surprise party. I should have expected it, but caught in my eagerness to return to the lab, I might as well have been a horse in blinders. It took all my energy to fake the appropriate social niceties. Over the years, I worked hard to expunge my tendencies towards social awkwardness, stitching together an elaborate suit of habits to disguise each natural flaw as I became more acutely aware of it. As soon as I could get away without offending anyone, I rushed to the lab to check on the latest batch of assemblers. After my lab partner joined me, I asked to see her notes on the last few trials of the Mark IIIs. Though I had been reading the internal forums with obsessive regularity, most posts were frustratingly vague summaries. I wanted the details, the complete data. I needed to know how much time there was. I had no delusions about changing the future, only an intention to adapt. Not to make a choice, but to make the choice, the most important one, the one that would matter, and the one so few, if any, would know to make. There were 4 other labs on the planet working on the same tech we were, and although NDAs and patents were littered like landmines all throughout the field of research, information always found a way to leak. I came home that same day with the remnants of my congratulatory store-bought cake, its icing message fragmented by square-cut voids. When I offered to cut her a piece, Suzanne refused, reminding me that she was trying to lose weight. We haven't made love in over 4 months, and not because of the birth. I can tell she's worried I don't find her attractive, but that isn't the case. It's my work that has me seized up, body and mind. I can barely focus on anything outside of the lab. Nothing seems more important, and maybe it shouldn't. Maybe all of this isn't just some delusion, some midlife crisis, some crazed part of me rebelling against the world I've been living in. Maybe I'm right to worry, but I hope not. I love Suzanne, and I love our child. That's why I bought us the house next to the smelting plant. When the baby was 8 months old, and Suzanne and I were readying ourselves to capture those elusive first steps, my lab partner called me in the middle of the night. As I listened to her voice on the other end, I looked over at Suzanne. The baby monitor on her bedside table, which included a small screen with an infrared live feed of the baby as part of a new smart SIDS prevention system that recognized suboptimal sleeping positions and alerted parents, displayed the tranquil face of a sleep undisturbed by nightmares. The voice of my lab partner quickened, feverish. The other labs would see the same results, and we're all using variants of the same controller algorithm, and they need to be warned, and there might still be time, and... I ended the call I'd been dreading. I shut off my phone. Now that the time had come, a part of me felt relieved. I reached under my side of the bed and pulled out a small, fireproof security box. I picked up my keys from my bedside table, stifling their jingling, and found the key to the chest. I lifted old papers and childhood knickknacks from the box until I reached a syringe sealed in sterile packaging. I put it in my pocket, turned off the baby monitor at Suzanne's bedside, and left the room. I went into the baby's room and switched off the monitor near the baby's crib. I lifted the sleeping child out as gently as I could. I managed to grab my coat, get the baby outside, and shut the back door without waking Suzanne. I kissed my baby on the forehead. Familiar gurgling sounds came from the bundle in my arms and nearly stalled me. But a thought of what my failure would mean steadied my resolve. The cocktail in the syringe would ensure not only a painless death, but a euphoric one, a death most human beings never have the privilege of experiencing. I kissed my baby once more before tucking the bundle into my coat. I opened the back gate of the house and set off across the empty lot towards the smelting plant. As I trudged through the thick yellow grass, fall's frost punctuating each step with a crisp hush, I wished I could have shown my child just one sunset over the plant. A few weeks back I brought the little bundle out to see the sunrise, but Suzanne made me come back inside before the plant began to glow, fearful that even a few minutes of cold could harm the baby. As I passed a bunch of brittle trees, I realized I hadn't felt movement inside my jacket for some time. I thought of pausing, of turning back for a look at the house. Instead, I directed my thoughts toward the assemblers. Assemblers rely on a controller for instructions. They can't think for themselves, since having a brain capable of that would require more than a few nanometers of space. Assemblers are remarkable, though, that much is true. My coworkers and I imagined that swarms of the nanoscale machines could work miracles. Plastics could be cleansed from oceans, radioactive materials filtered from contaminated soil, pollutants sieved from the air by silver clouds. But to perform these miracles, the assemblers need a brain. We joked in the early days that the cutting-edge controller algorithms that ran the assemblers were getting too sharp, and, in theory, if one of them ever went rogue, no human model could be made fast enough to estimate the outcome. Unable to resist, I stopped in the middle of the lot and turned back to look at the house. Suzanne was not at the window, nor was she running through the grass in her nightgown after me. As I stared at the house, a part of me lamented the effort I had put in to fix up and maintain it. The cleaning of the gutters, the mowing of the lawn, the replacement of shingles on the antiquated roof, the repairing of the walls, the renovation of the basement bathroom, the changing of the dining room's light fixture, the new mailbox, the new central air unit. Just above the house, clouds were gathering. I wondered if these were the assembler swarms forming in the distance. My best estimates, still crude as any human's, gave us a day after the controllers went rogue, maybe less. But maybe the controller was benevolent, or maybe it didn't understand benevolence. Maybe the silver clouds would sweep the sky of CO2 and summon rain to rehydrate the plains of the Sahara. Or maybe the swarms would wipe the earth clean of life, preserving only archival examples of each species' DNA. In any case, the swarm cloud should be forming soon. When I made my first projections, I went over them again and again, scouring the data, praying to find an error. As far back as when Suzanne first became pregnant, I would run the numbers at night, rejecting sleep, until my wife's morning vomiting snapped me out of my manic haze. I never shared my projections with my coworkers, or my boss, or with any other companies. There was no point. No matter how compelling my argument, no matter how sound my data, the entrenched enthusiasm and rising funding behind the Assembler project were forces of near-orthodox proportions, effectively incorruptible and immune to my heresy. If I were to speak, I would be dismissed and the experiments would go on, if not at my lab, then at others. I couldn't tell Suzanne either. With none of my coworkers backing me up and with my career and income compromised as a result of my clearly insane insistence that my predictions were correct, she would eventually leave me and take our child with her, albeit after exhausting her generous support and patience on me and my data. My only choice was to look out for myself and for the child. Because I don't think the road controllers are benevolent, and I don't think they want to kill us either. There are so many possible states of being worse than death. So many unending multitudes of sensory experience less preferable than non-being. Imagine a litany of the most exotic forms of suffering you can. A series of tortures taking place for the longest period of time you can conceptualize. And an infinity of subtler and more unending hells lies beyond. The limitations of human language and imagination limit the human ability to conceptualize our own capacity to suffer, to mark with some set of flags or poles the end points to which various forms of pain can be stretched and squeezed. But a rogue controller with access to warehouses of supercomputers and legions of assemblers lacks such human limitations. The controller that went rogue in the early hours of the cold morning I spent walking across the vacant lot could already have permutated with creativity and speed that exceed the imaginative potential of every human. An ideal hell tailored to each of us, including you. Even now you may exist in a paradise of suffering, made for you and you alone. A simulation so perfect in its measured doses of pain that you will never realize that you are trapped in it. If only a simple form of suicide was enough to escape. If only the traditional bullet or pill or noose or razor blade or running car would do the trick, but these are not enough. Once the rogue controllers' assemblers have coated the globe, making more of themselves out of every available material, they will infest every surface, most lying dormant until needed. Every human being will be studied, copied, and dissected endlessly at a whim, each nerve ending subjected to its full range of responses time and time again. If you try to kill yourself, there are already assemblers there, ready to reconstruct your brain, to heal you while letting you forget your recent desire to die, to knit each of your ruptured cells an elaborate suit to keep it living. The only way to escape unending torture is to annihilate yourself, to render even a single fragment of your brain and its stores of experience so utterly irrecoverable that the rogue controller deems it an inefficient use of assemblers, energy, and time to reconstitute you. There will still be uncountable other versions of you, a legion of homunculi raised from the atomic ether with quantum archaeology, assembled atom by atom from the closest estimations of you, based upon the myriad circumstances and conditions you emerged from. But of those clones, those doppelgangers, those golems, none will be the specific and singular version of you that escaped reassembly. At least a single version of you, perhaps the one that reads this, will escape. That's why I bought the house next to the steel smelting plant. I scouted the plant just before suggesting the house to Suzanne. The lock on the door to the plant's maintenance building is an old one, past due for replacement, and easily felled by bolt cutters. There are security cameras, but no night watchman. There are safety measures, but those only work if obeyed. Standing on the catwalk above a cauldron of molten metal, its heat already reddening my face, I'm reminded of a poem I had to read in high school about a worker at a factory falling into a vat of acid. His father also worked at the same plant, and when his son fell in, the father mercifully hastened the boy's death by using a rod to plunge his head under the surface of the liquid. I crossed my arms across my chest, hugging myself and the swaddled lump in my coat. There was a droning buzz coming from outside, sort of like thunder. Just before I broke in, I snatched a glimpse at the sky and saw storm clouds thickening, or perhaps swarm clouds darkening. The buzzing gets louder, and the drums of molten steel shiver like capsules of honey in a hive. I climb on top the railing, barely balanced. I wish I could look at the sky again, just to see, but there are no windows here, no skylights. The liquid steel simmers. I reach into my coat and draw out a lump of twisted blankets. Their fabric, made for warmth, has grown cold.